Welcome to the Sacred Stream Radio Podcast. I'm Laura Chandler, and my guest today is therapist, teacher, and author John Tsilimparis. And we're talking about his new book, The Magic in the Tragic. Welcome, John.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I have your book here. I enjoyed the book, and I want to just say it's not only is the content excellent, it's aesthetically quite beautiful. It's a beautiful book
Mm,
to read. It's just very aesthetically pleasing. So I just wanted to
good.
mention that off the top. Really, job well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, so I just want to start with what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I've been a grief counselor as well as a psychotherapist for other types of issues for a very long time, close to 3 decades now. And so I have helped a lot of people dealing with grief, but also dealing with other types of adversity as well. There's a myriad of things that we go through other than just losing a loved one and just, the general sense of loss. People go through financial hardships and stress and worries and relationship breakups and divorces and all kinds of things. And also, when I was young, tragedy came to my family early, and I didn't have, as a teenager, didn't have tools to deal with my grief. It wasn't until about 10 or 15 years later that I actually started to address the grief. And it was pretty overwhelming at the time. So it would have been nice if I had had some kind of tools at the time to deal with it. But my immigrant parents were unaware of those types of things, and everyone kind of went into their own corner, and nobody really talked about it. And so I kind of felt like I wanted to give people, a different experience of that. Hence, flipping the script on grief, not to look at grief as something that you have to avoid or something that you should be afraid of, but something that you can actually embrace, which I'll get into in a little while.
Well, I appreciate that you're talking about grief as something broader than specifically like the loss of someone that you love. And I think that we are experiencing a collective grief in the world right now. And I mean, historically we've experienced collective grief, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on how we navigate collective grief or what collective grief is.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the results of that or the consequences of that, especially since the pandemic. There's been, much more loneliness, much more instances of depression. Stress levels are sky high these days, not only with the condition of our world, but condition of our country right now. So collectively, people have been more anxious from what I've seen since 9/11,
Mhm.
but more specifically in the past 4 or 5 years. And, it's a time of extreme uncertainty and chaos. And we don't have, safe footing to stand on these days. There's a lot of worry, and the uncertainty is sometimes very debilitating for people.
Yes. And you shared that you didn't have the tools that you could have been helpful for you when you were young to navigate grief. Can you talk a little bit about some of those tools?
Well, I discovered on my own that if I leaned into things that inspired me, things that moved me, things that uplifted my soul, I managed my grief and my pain a little bit better.
Mhm.
So this is all something that came across my table on its own, pretty much. But luckily, I noticed it and I started using intention to access it. And the arts was really one way that I did that. Music being the number one sort of inspiration portal for me, because that opened up all kinds of things where I was able to give my grief, my pain, my life a little more meaning. I found beauty in my suffering. And so that's really the gist of the book, is leaning into our aesthetic mindset, which is different for everybody. Nobody has the same kind of things that they love and things that move them and give them inspiration. So one way is what I call inspiration exposure. And that's where we immerse ourselves in the awe inspiring realms of, again, art, music, um, poetry, philosophy, literature, nature, even sports, whatever it is that moves your soul, and doing that in a way that helps you, again, transform a lot of your grief and your adversity into purpose. Like you're changing pain, you're converting pain into purpose. And, there's something very powerful about that if one uses the intention to do that.
Hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about how inspirational exposure works?
Well, there are a lot of studies out there that show that exposure to like awe-inspiring exposure, awe-inducement, um, activates, for one, the prefrontal cortex, which is your executive brain. And the executive brain, which is your higher self, helps you to manage difficult things better. It makes you more self reflective. It makes you more compassionate of others, and then in turn makes you more compassionate with yourself. So, when that part of your brain is activated because you inspired yourself, you just handle life a little bit better. You have a higher threshold for distress tolerance and you just manage it a little bit better. And what you do is you start reassociating. This is important.
Mhm.
You start reassociating the negative reaction you have to your grief with things like curiosity, things like calm, things like tranquility, things like personal growth, things like self reflection, meaning, and stuff. That's a big shift. It's kind of a game changer. So instead of pushing your grief away, pushing the adversity away, you're actually deliberately and intentionally moving towards it.
Hmm. And there's a lot there. And one of the things I just want to mention is that in the book, you offer a lot of very helpful exercises and to do to help people in navigating grief. And so um, you just brought up a really important point about about moving towards the feelings rather than away from the feelings. And I think in our culture and in many cultures now, the idea is to we don't talk about grief, we don't talk about loss, we don't talk about our impending death, and so we become sort of isolated from that experience. And I think one of the great things about your book is you're helping people sort of be able to e- experience those feelings, embrace those feelings, and not move away from them, so that they develop um, a tolerance for them. I think.
Yes. Yes. Our sense of avoidance, and nobody wants to suffer, but our
Mhm,
reflex to avoid is compounded by what our society says. Other countries are different, but our society says that, grief, pain, emotional pain is almost a dirty word. You want to get away from it as quickly as possible. But I'm saying, and the book is saying, and again, exercises that have worked over the last 3 decades with my clients says that try to respect your pain, hold it in high regard. And as you dignify it by immersing yourself in it to the degree that you can take it, you're actually reducing it. You're changing the complexion of it.
mhm,
You're changing the knee jerk reaction, which is, I need to get away from this. The problem with all of that, when people do that, is that no matter who you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how successful you are, no matter how much you have in your life, or even how many people love you, you're going to experience loss, grief, and adversity in your life. You're not going to be spared heartbreak. So why not do something with it? Why not use it as a way to elevate your existence and your spirit other than that, other than avoiding it? And, the ancient Greeks, I always talk about this, but there's a classical reference, as there are many classical references in the book. The ancient Greeks talked about the nobility of suffering.
mhm,
To them, nobility of suffering was the kind of nobility that you took pride in having suffered. In other words, it was kind of a rite of passage. It was your way to maturation. So, talk about holding it in high regard. They
mhm,
really, really looked up to it and they saw it as something that was part of life. And, maybe if it wasn't important, natural selection, evolution would have eliminated it a long time ago, but it's there for a reason and it sticks around. So,
mhm.
it's better to be curious about it than to be avoidant of it.
Right, right. That's so helpful. And, I think like one of the tenets in Buddhism is simply, suffering exists. And so one of the ways to navigate suffering is to accept that it exists. And so if we're engaged in avoidance of suffering, avoidance of the negative things, which we somehow in our culture have kind of thought like, well, if we can be successful and we can acquire all these things, like we're going to somehow not experience these things that are
Exactly.
part of life.
I It's not about moving on from grief, it's moving through grief.
Yes,
It's a
yes.
whole
Or
different game changer.
mhm,
So if I can rewire my brain to be inspired and moved by my grief, my life is gonna have a different experience. Imagine, Laura, if, you you could learn to give or to have as much faith and as much confidence in the sorrowful, in the sadness,
mhm,
in the suffering, as you do with happier aspects of your life. Your day will be vastly different. Paradoxically, your day won't go as bad because you're kind of going to be expecting it in
mhm,
sort of a kind of, lighthearted kind of, okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit down today, possibly because this thing just happened to me. And instead of resisting that and pushing that away, I'm actually trying to let go of the control
mhm.
and I'm letting it just be there.
Yes, yes. It
And having
almost
a good support system helps as well, too.
sure, and it magnifies it when you're pushing it away. It almost it makes it bigger, right?
It does, it makes it worse, and so then you start beating yourself up because you can't move on from it, and you
Mhm,
haven't gotten "over it," quote, unquote, and
mhm,
so there's shame that comes up. People associate feeling down or feeling depressed or still in grief, with, have negative connotations about it, that it's a weakness or you should move past and, focus on the living and all that stuff. And of course, that is the goal, to focus on the living, but
mhm,
there shouldn't be a time frame. There shouldn't be any kind of timeline for your grief. Grief is something to learn from. It's not something to run away from.
mm, mm. And can you talk about other kinds of grief that you are seeing people come in and that they're suffering from in your practice or in life in general?
I would say it's losses, and we saw
Mm,
a lot of people suffering from losses from the pandemic.
mhm,
Livelihoods, homes, businesses, losing family members, losing the ability to be with people. Losing our sense of socialization. And so, another exercise that I use in the book, besides the inspiration exposure, which is one of the main ones that we do, is I have people write themselves a condolence letter, a sympathy letter, which could be a paragraph, could be a page. And this is where you immerse yourself in all of the loss and pain that's been causing you so much grief. And you are giving yourself, as if you were giving this to somebody that you care about,
mhm,
all of the love, all of the positive regard, all of the compassion that you don't give to yourself. So you do that, and you do that without giving solutions, without offering fixes. And that's always a very powerful exercise for people.
mm, yeah. So, do you
Because you're again, it's not about just somebody that died. Excuse me. It's about any loss, and
mhm,
loss means we were attached to something. Loss means there was something in our lives that had meaning for us, and
mhm,
that's why it's so difficult to get past. But it's also good to remember that if I could create meaning with something that I loved or that I needed, I can do it again. It may be with a different person, it may be in a different career, it may be in something different, but I can do it again. So the sympathy letter helps us, you know, take inventory of what was great in our lives and how we can get it again.
mm. You touch on something really important, which is self-compassion. And I think that a lot of people have trouble with that. And,
Yes.
and so the sympathy letter is really a great way to help people focus on being considerate of, for themselves in a particular way. Do do you have any other thoughts about developing self-compassion?
Yeah, I think we as humans, and I am no different, we are so much more compassionate to others
Mhm,
than we are to ourselves.
mhm,
Brene Brown says that she's a recovering perfectionist, and
mhm,
I am as well. I'm really hard on myself.
mhm,
Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. And in case, unless I create the intention to be aware of that and to catch myself whenever I do that, I do it unconsciously. It's
yeah.
such a reflex. It's such a knee jerk. So I think that most people are like that. And
Mhm,
so I think it's important to be able to give yourself compassion if you want to work through some of your grief and you want to move through it as opposed to, getting over it. So good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because it's not all cultures that have this as an issue. I remember, what you may have heard this. Dalai Lama had a hard time understanding what self-compassion, because it just is something that's natural. But in the West, we've developed this sort of um, anti-self, or being hard on the self in this particular way. So it's an interesting dilemma.
Yes.
So in the book, you talk about something called emotional resiliency. Can you define that and talk a little bit about how we develop that?
Yeah, emotional resilience is a little bit different than emotional intelligence. Both of them are important. Emotional intelligence is about having the awareness of yourself outside of yourself,
Mhm,
being able to separate rational from irrational and things like that, being able to be an observer of your emotions. Emotional resilience is our ability to convert pain and suffering into thriving. It's a whole
mhm,
different conversation if you really think about it.
mhm,
And so the book explains how leaning into an aesthetic mindset is learning the ability to be able to notice emotional depth, meaning, and importance and value in everyday things,
mhm,
whether it's nature or in the things that you do well, it's in the goodness of other people, whatever it is that you want to take notice of. If
mhm,
you can see that and you can stick to an aesthetic mindset, little by little, you're building emotional resilience. And I think that's a big thing to remember moving forward in this world, starting today, starting tomorrow.
mhm.
We're going to live with more uncertainty and chaos for the next few years, I think. And I think one needs to be equipped with it. And emotional resilience is the best place to start.
Mm. Yes, and you bring up a good point. Like there's this idea of things being unsteady, things changing constantly, and that it may be a little more intense right now in this particular time in the world, but that is an aspect of life. That is an aspect of the human condition, and so developing an ability to, I think you talk about it like be going with the flow, being like the ocean. Um,
Yes, we do not like impermanence. We
mhm,
don't like that. Naturally, the
mm,
reflex is to want things to be permanent. And
yeah,
American Buddhist Pema Chodron
mhm,
talks a lot about that.
yeah,
She talks about how building emotional resilience is like learning to be, a peaceful warrior. It's learning to understand your limitations, to know what you're dealing with, to hold that center when you're feeling bad. And I wanted to quote you, in the book, I quote American poet Emily Dickinson, and she
mm,
said, people need hard times and oppression to develop psychic muscles.
mhm,
And I think that psychic muscles is a good way to describe emotional resilience, because if we wake up every morning hoping that things are better in our world or in our lives personally, that's not the best way to start. The best way to start is to say, whatever today happens, whatever befalls me today, I'm going to be prepared because I am taking the intention, I'm using the intention to allow, like you said, to go with the flow with whatever happens. I can take whatever happens. It might be horrible and I might feel awful and I might suffer a little bit,
mhm.
but the suffering itself is not going to take me down.
Yeah, such a good point. It's such a good point. You talk about the importance of emotional vulnerability, like being okay with being vulnerable. Can you talk some more about that? Because I think we have an aversion to that in our culture too. It's like we're tough, and there's a strength in vulnerability.
Yes, it's interesting how most people that we admire are not people that are necessarily openly and publicly vulnerable about things. Maybe that's changing a little bit, but most of the time we admire people that exude strength, stoicism, that have stood up to oppression in some way, heroes and things like that. And those are all good. And I have my heroes. So that's some of my aesthetic principle as well, too. But in other ways, being vulnerable is really being strong as well, but it's in a different way. I am not trying to shy away from my grief. I'm not trying to push my suffering away, but I'm building strength, not in spite of my suffering, but because of my suffering.
Mhm,
So, be velvet and steel.
mhm,
Be find and be okay with the beauty in your beast. It's
mhm,
okay to have a vulnerability.
mhm. I wonder. It's almost as if not being willing to accept your vulnerability makes you more vulnerable. So,
Yeah, I think that if you fight it, and you really resist it, as we discussed before, I think it makes it much harder to manage it when it does come, because it's going to come. I
mhm,
mean, if there was a way to flip a switch off and, you're never going to feel any kind of emotional pain and never going to feel the pain of a loss, and attachments don't have consequences, first of all, that wouldn't be a way to live our lives. If
mhm,
we could do that, that would be different. But the human mind, the heart is not built that way.
mhm,
We get attached, and those bonds cause us to when we lose those bonds, it causes us pain.
mhm,
And so that's why inspiration exposure is a good way to accommodate having that pain. It's not pushing the pain away, it's creating a different mindset to go side by side by it. So, what I tell people is try to learn how to give yourself goosebumps,
mm.
try to learn how to give yourself deliberate chills as often as possible. And you'll be surprised at how being vulnerable becomes much easier.
Yes, you refer to that, I think, as awe inducement in the, book, and I love that, and can you talk a little bit more about the effect of that and how you do that?
Yeah, like the studies that we talked about before, where you are activating the prefrontal cortex, when you're creating that kind of awe, that kind of inspiration in your life, again, you are elevating your mood. You
Mhm,
are creating some beauty out of what you put aside as something that you should avoid.
mhm,
So, awe inducement is really powerful, and
yeah,
it could be anything. It could be reading a book about, a war hero, or reading a book about one of your favorite athletes and how they overcame difficult times in their lives. So you want to try to surround yourself with um, these heroes, these great stories, or you want to surround yourself with uplifting music. Sometimes uplifting music can be the melancholy kind too.
mhm,
I think the first time that I was inspired by an aesthetic was when my father played me a piece of music by Antonin Dvorak. I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it was the Adagio from the New World Symphony. And when you hear it, you clearly can get a sense that this is such a sad piece. That's the reaction to it. And I didn't want to hear it anymore after I first heard it. But after I kept on hearing it, I found that, you know what, if I can get through hearing this piece, which is about 2 or 3 minutes, because it caused me so much sadness, I can get through anything. And so I use that piece very often when I'm feeling sad, and the opposite effect happens. It actually uplifts me.
yes, that makes so much sense. Well, I know you're a musician, and, I'm a musician and singer-songwriter, and I would say, for me, I certainly suffered from, depression, starting around the age of 12, and I feel like I resolved that much later in my life, but, through some of the things we're talking about, but I credit music and playing music and writing music and engaging with the creative aspect, and connecting to something larger than myself as I felt it to be, really was what saved me as a young person and in my career before I found some other things that were even more helpful. But so I feel like with music, whether you're however or any art form that you're engaging with, it's taking us out of our our critical thinking mind, out of our normal mindset and into a larger mindset. And, it gives us pause, it gives us opening. And then those things that you're talking about that are awe inducing, those things that speak to us, whether through music or words or painting, then we have this moment, and nature works in the same way to expand and
Yes.
feel more deeply. And certainly, like with music, it's really penetrating, and you're feeling that deeply. So there's a real physicality to the experience of, awe and wonder.
Yes. Uh, um, I think for me, my experience is that I switch from, ego relatedness in the moment when I'm hearing these types of pieces, especially in my darkest moments, to more of an interrelatedness. I
Mhm,
feel like I'm a bigger part of, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm a part of something much bigger than me.
mhm,
And so art helps us expand our imagination. Art helps us feel feelings more deeply. They help us be more self reflective. We are more compassionate with others and ourselves. And it helps us manage our feelings, helps us feel our feelings in a safer environment. And that's a big plus because you don't have to spend any money for that.
Mhm.
You just have to make the intention, as I've said before, to actually do that for yourself. So music did save me as well, too.
Mhm.
I feel like, in the last 50 years, that's been my go to. It never lets me down. It's a lifelong friend and it's always there.
Mhm.
I have other aesthetics too, visual art too. I love nature, but music is the number one for me.
Mm. Yeah, it's so powerful. Well, you touched on, this idea of, we're touching on this idea of something larger than ourselves and feeling part of something larger than ourselves. And you touch on it in the book too. This idea of spirituality. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, the universe, the almighty, the divine, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it, that art is the universe or the divine expressing itself, that you're
Mhm.
connecting to something so much bigger than you. I mean, it's a curious thing, Laura. I mean, when I'm driving in my car, no matter how I'm feeling, if I hear certain pieces of music,
Mhm.
my consciousness changes immediately. And whatever I was grieving about 5 minutes ago, I'm probably going to switch into gratitude about it. Rejection becomes redirection. All things change for me when that happens. And, even as a little boy, I started to wonder, and maybe that's one of the roots of this book is what is that about? Why does that happen? It doesn't matter if I'm listening to Bach or I'm listening to Led Zeppelin or I'm listening to Frank Sinatra. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever touches my soul that way. And I have to believe that that is something bigger than me, that has something spiritual, something divine. And so that reconnects me with my core values. It
Mhm.
reconnects me with my purpose, my sense of gratitude, my need for connection in the world. So, um, yeah, I mean, everyone's got their own version of spirituality or religion. And I think it's good to have that.
Mhm.
And in saying that, I think it's good to explore that because we need that going through this world. It's nice to have some meaning and some purpose in life that way, and spirituality does it for me.
Yes, yes, and and I think we're kind of involved, in at this time in the world of people are kind of exploring what is spirituality for me, and and they're rethinking these things, and how does it coexist with science, and where does it intersect? And I think that one of the ways I look at spirituality is it's a care for the soul. It's the care of our spirits, and that has great importance. And your book is really all about caring for the spirit and ways of caring for the spirit.
It is. I strongly advocate staying in the inquiry about things,
Mhm.
wonder about things.
Mhm.
Why is this music affecting me this way? Why does looking at this painting make me feel so exalted about, the painter that painted it? What is it about nature that moves my spirit like that? So if you can stay curious, you learn more about yourself and about the world. I think that this is going to sound really out there, but I think that at this level of human consciousness and what we're
Mhm.
capable of understanding, I think is just a thumbnail of a thumbnail of what we could learn and maybe will learn in a few hundred years or maybe a few thousand years. I don't know when that will be, but I think there's just so much more out there. And it's okay if we don't have the answers,
Mhm.
but it's better if you stay curious about it,
Mhm. Well,
you
let's
know?
go there. What do you think it's gonna be like? And, how will it evolve in 100 years?
I just
How would
think
you
that
like
we're
it
going
to
to
evolve? How would you like to?
I hope that we will connect to whatever is out there once our level of consciousness and our ability to expand our awareness will change over
Mhm.
the millennia.
Mhm.
We've come a long way in the last 50,000 years, and imagine what it's going to be in 50,000 years in the future. So
Yeah.
I don't exactly know, but I'm not afraid of it. I actually have a lot of wonder and curiosity about it.
That's great. That's great. Well, I just want to touch on a little bit, as we're talking about developing these skills and resiliency, um, you bring up mindfulness as a means of self-regulation, and I
Yes.
love that. And maybe talk a little bit about that.
Mindfulness is a big part of flipping the script on your grief and your adversity, because what you're doing is you're getting yourself into what I call the alchemy of adversity.
Hmm.
You are not resisting, like we've discussed, not fighting, not pushing it away. You're heightening your awareness to how you feel about how you feel.
Hmm.
So, in other words, it's developing a different relationship with your discomfort. Instead of pushing it away, again, you are thinking, oh, I'm noticing that I'm feeling uncomfortable now. There I go again. Let's look at this. What is it that I'm uncomfortable about? And after you figure out what it is that you're worried about, you're looking into your body, you're thinking about your breathing, your muscles, the chair, feeling the chair underneath your seat, feeling the ground underneath your feet. You're using sensory perception. You're hearing trees rustling outside, you're hearing cars, you're hearing birds chirping. So there's actually a protocol to that, and it's very powerful. It's not meditation. It's not, sitting in a room quietly in the lotus position for 30 minutes and trying to concentrate on your breathing. It's not that at all.
Hmm.
It's just having a watchfulness, a very unique watchfulness about your thoughts and your feelings all at the same time. It's pretty powerful.
Yes, and thank you for describing that, because I think that's really helpful for people. And I think people kind of get caught up in in meditating as something that that you achieve, and it's more something that you do. And mindfulness, as you're describing it, is really a way of sort of interrupting the kind of constant thoughts that we may have going on, and sort of noticing that those are going on, and then it gives us pause and the ability to stop those thoughts and be reflective.
That's right. And mindfulness is not a game. It's not a skill to learn for the purpose of achieving something.
Mhm.
It's not results oriented. It's all process oriented.
Mhm.
It's like flossing your teeth every
Yeah,
night
yeah.
or throwing out the garbage. It's something that you just do. And little by little, you start to see that the more you do it, and of course, it takes a little bit of practice. The more you do it, the more different you start to experience how
Mhm.
you experience adversity, how you experience anything. So it's not about getting good at it. It's just
Mhm.
about doing it as a process.
Yes, I always describe it as like working out. Like, some days you're gonna have a great workout, and you're like, yes, and other days
Yeah.
you're like, oh, it's hard, it's so hard, but you do it anyway.
I'm glad you brought that up. And another great example of that, Laura, is that you could go to the gym and get a great workout for an hour. But if you go to the gym and you have a trainer, you're going to get an even better workout in that
Mhm.
hour. So you can become your own trainer. Maybe Magic in the Tragic helps you do that, or you can use mindfulness to help you do that. So, it's okay to reach out. It's okay to, have support and learn from people and
Mhm.
learn from even yourself.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I like that. Going to the gym and working out is a good analogy for that.
Mm. Well, John, I'm so appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us about your book. It's a great book, and do you have any final thoughts, or anything that you're hoping to see, or you'd like to see this in the future, or the book do, or what? Any final thoughts?
I just like to tell people that, don't be afraid of your grief. Of course, it's painful. And of course, it's scary. And of course, our society tells us that it's shameful to continue grieving longer than you should. But try to put all that chatter aside and not be afraid of holding your grief in high regard. And, again, dignifying it with all of the respect that you might give to someone else who's going through that. And remember that it's a natural reflex to be much kinder to others than to ourselves. And so you have to make the intention to do that for yourself every single day.
So helpful. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.